place to repair the electric steering.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm going around and around with a Chrysler dealer on mine. The radio is garbage. It just shuts itself off, and a whole bunch of other things go through the radio. And they said, well, we're going to replace your radio under warranty. That's great, good, wonderful. But they're back ordered about 45 days. So okay, I wait 45 days. I never hear from them. I go to the dealership and say, what's the deal with the radio? Oh, it's in. We didn't call you. No, you didn't call me. Uh, well, we'll make an appointment for next Thursday to go put it in. So I brought them the car early in the morning, left it there all day. They called me up and said, well, we got good news and bad news. The good news is we changed the screen on your radio, but that didn't fix it. I went, the screen's fine. The screen is not the problem. The problem is the radio and the software that's in it. So now I'm waiting for them to actually get a radio. And mine just shuts itself off for no apparent reason, and you have to reboot. The only way you can reboot the thing is to stop the car, open the door, got to open the door, close the door, restart the car, and then it'll come back on.
Well, I've got an '06 Ford and everything works on it. Everything's great. And
Really?
it looks real
Good.
good, but it's rusted underneath.
Yeah, well, there's that problem. You're apparently in the snowy area with salt and stuff.
And central New York.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah, I grew up in New England, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember our family's 57 Chevy, not 57, it was a 57 Ford rather. By about 1960, 61, the top of the fenders had rusted out because all the salt gathered up there, sprayed off the front wheels. It was really great.
The '57 Fords, the headlamps used to fall out.
Yep.
It rusts
That's
on the
it
diesel
rusted
there.
right behind the headlights. It was
Yeah.
terrific. It was really great. Uh, so there you go. I don't know if we've gone forward or backwards on cars, but I know they sure cost a lot more and got way more stuff to go wrong.
Oh, it is. It doesn't go, it's much more reliable, but when it goes, it's very expensive to get anything
Right.
done with
Well,
it.
yeah, well, otherwise the car's pretty good. Everything it's pleasant to drive and easy to drive, and I'm happy with that. It's just all the extraneous stuff that they've added for safety that I kind of question whether it's really safer or not.
I've got a car that'll park itself, but I've never tried it.
I wouldn't have the guts to try that, but I was talking to a friend that bought a Tesla and he's using it in the self-drive mode. And I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. I
Well,
mean,
the parking is different because what it is you have it moving very slowly and you got
right.
your foot on the brake. So if it starts to get close to, and it warns you when it's close,
Yeah.
so you could stop it. But I don't just have occasion to do that, even parallel park or anything. So
Well, there's not where I am, not much, there's not many opportunities for parallel parking, so it doesn't bother me one way though. It was not one of my high spots when I took my driver's test when I was 16, but I did pass it, so and I know when I
Guys, it's 6:05. Let's
okay, all right, we'll stop
get
BSing.
started. Well, that's okay. It's been interesting.
I don't know how interesting.
Everybody has a car story.
Yeah. By the way, I sent you a check today. It's in the mail.
Oh, you did. Thank you very much. Okay. Welcome to the March meeting of the Early Television Museum community. Want to start off by thanking the New Jersey Antique Radio Club for sponsoring this meeting and providing the Zoom feed. I will start out and give a report on the museum's activities. A bunch of things happening. Let me start with the convention. We have, I think we're going to have record attendance at the convention this year. We have about 10 more registered this year at this time than we did at this time last year. And we have so far 13 people who have never attended before. And in addition, we got a couple of old timers that haven't been here for the last couple of years. John Folsom's going to be here, and Daryl Hawk's going to be here. So it should be a really interesting convention. The planning's going well for it. We bought 100 used stackable chairs that are in good condition. Bob Dobush came down and picked them up at a church a few miles away and took them to the museum. The other thing we're doing is putting a new floor in. We decided to go with the rolled rubber floors, where the seams can be glued together. I think that'll be sturdier than the carpet we have in there. So between the chairs and the floors, it's going to be quite a bit more comfortable than before. Urge you to register. This year, it's not as critical that you do it early because we don't have catering. We do have, though, the Saturday night dinner, and I have to give the restaurant account a week before the convention. So, especially if you're planning on attending the Saturday night dinner, please register as soon as you can. Stuff is coming in for the auction. Just got another batch of entries this afternoon. We have some stuff from Richard Brewster that's in New York on Long Island that would be really nice to have in the auction if we could find a way to get it here. So if anybody is coming from, would be willing to haul some stuff. It's not a bunch of, it's small stuff. So it could fit in, anybody's car basically. So if anybody would be willing to haul some items from him from Long Island to the convention, please like to hear from you. That's the only thing that's going on that's the sort of a summary of what's going on at the convention. Does anybody have any questions? Should mention we have 5 good presentations this year. One of them is short, so I don't think we'll have any trouble fitting them in time-wise.
Steve?
Yeah.
Whereabouts from Maryland do you need something hauled from?
It's from, I don't know where, I don't remember where it is on Long Island, but I can get information to you.
Okay, I'm not far from the Hagerstown, Cumberland area. So if the haul would be from there, I might be able to help you if it's not overly large. Remember, I have a Toyota 4Runner, so it's not a very big car.
Well, it's not much stuff, as I said. I'll get in touch with you after the convention, and let you know what, after this meeting, probably tomorrow.
Yeah,
And we'll see.
Richard lives on the let's see, what would you say, the North Fork of Long Island, out close to Orient.
I don't know.
But
I
anyway,
can't remember what town he's
it's
in.
a North Fork is where it is.
I think it's
Oh, is that where it is? Okay.
That's where he lives. I've been to his place,
Okay.
but the exact town I don't have.
Yeah. Okay. John, I'll give you a call. We'll talk about it. Next thing is membership. We're now up to 226 members, including a bunch of new people. At the end of last year, we only had 216. So we're 10 above that. We're going to do quite a bit better this year. That's the good news. The bad news is we still have 40 last year's members who haven't renewed. Some of them I'm sure will do when they come to the convention. But if you haven't renewed your membership, please go online and do it. Let's pause now and see if there's anybody who is new to this meeting and would like to introduce themselves. Well, nobody knew. Let me go on to the other big thing that's going on at the museum. A museum in near Schenectady has been forced to close its doors. They've been struggling financially for a long time. And they discovered, I think to their surprise, that they have a GE GM 295 pre-war mirror and lid set that's been in their warehouse for years. They have to get everything out of their facility by the end of April. So I have made a deal with them to buy that set at a good price. And Bob Dobush has volunteered to go up and pick it up. And at the same time, he's going to pick up that Sylvania slideshow set that was donated, which is near Syracuse. The set is, I'm going to be talking about it in my museum item discussion in a couple of minutes. It's in great shape. We started I solicited through our email list for donations to pay for it because we're paying $5,000 for the set and probably going to cost us close to $1,000 to get it and the Sylvania back here. Now we could have probably paid for that out of our regular operating budget, but thought it was a good opportunity to solicit money from our members and our whole database of about 1,600 people. We did that 2 days ago, and we now are up to 5,000, about just a little under $5,000 in donations. And then we have a couple more pledges that haven't come in yet. So I think we're probably pretty close to the $6,000 level, or will be shortly, which is really nice. Nice to have that kind of support. I'll be talking about. Does anybody have any questions about that? If you want to make a donation, go to our website and it's on the home page. There's a link to do it. Everybody who makes the donation amounts are from $100 to $1,000, and everybody who donates in one of those categories will have their name on a sign that's next to the set when we put it on display. Any questions before I go on?
Steve, can I make a couple newsletter comments?
Absolutely.
First off, I think he's on tonight. James O'Neill made some corrections on our description of the AWA Museum's Voice of America display. And he started by saying he didn't want to be nitpicking, but if a museum has something on display, they want to certainly present it correctly. So I'm going to print his letter in the next newsletter, James's letter, so that everyone can see it. And I'm also going to pass it on to the AWA Museum people. And I also want to thank Wayne Brettel for being in our spotlight last month, because he was really good at providing information, made it a lot easier for me. So that's that.
Okay.
And James here, I want to thank you for the correction. Yeah, as I mentioned in my email, I spent probably I'm going to guess 7, 8 months, maybe 9 out of my life out at the Delano relay station. And I know that control room very well. And it's missing a few things, but it's basically the same control room they used to run the transmitters, these 7 250,000 watt shortwave transmitters there. The master control is back in Washington, D.C., or maybe was. I guess you got the news about what's happening with the government. So anyway, I'll bow out here, but I just wanted to put that in. Thank you for the corrections. I'm a stickler.
No, that's no problem. Also, today was on the news that a judge has put a stop order in that they can't take apart the Voice of America equipment until it's all settled in court. So that's good news too.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I can figure out how to share a screen here.
In the middle of the bottom of your screen, you should see a button.
I see that.
If you click on it, another screen will pop up, and it will show you a list of screens that you could share.
Okay. Am I sharing? Can you guys see something now?
We
Yeah.
can see
Yeah.
your desktop.
My desktop, great. Okay, then let me go to, there we go. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This is the front of the GM 295. Now, what makes this rare is it is a 1938 set. You probably, those of you who are familiar with pre-war stuff, know that their HM line, like the HM 171, 275, etc., 225, came out the next year, and those were the ones that they made in significant quantity. We don't know how many, but there are quite a few of them that are still around. This set, there are only 3 around, and 2 of them are in other museums in the Schenectady area. That makes sense because you know, it was made in the GE factory. Well, the guts were, but we discovered that the cabinet is made by the Gunlock Chair Company, which is still in business. I guess they custom made these cabinets. They're just looking. I haven't seen the inside of it. I just have, here's a picture of the inside of it, and you can see there's the power supply chassis, monster as all those things were, and you notice there are 2x2 rectifiers. The only thing that I can think that means is that this is a voltage doubler, which means that the CRT is being operated at, you know, 12,000 volts or so, as opposed to the 6 or 7,000 in the 1939 models, TRK-12 and the GE model. Other interesting thing is if you look up at here's the tuner. The 3 tubes in the tuner. I surmise from that this is an RF amplifier. Again, none of the 1939 models had RF amplifiers. They just had an oscillator and a mixer. So if that turns out to be true, this will be the only set that I know of that has an RF amplifier in the tuner. Other interesting thing is, though the tube looks like a 12AP4, it's labeled on the tube diagram as a C7318C. So it may be something different from a 12AP4. We'll find out when we get it here. Here's a back view of the set. You can see the speaker, and you can see the RF and sweep chassis here. Here is the control panel. And you can see these are the audio knobs on the side here. Well, it's video, there's brightness, contrast, and I think this is background, tone and volume. And then these are push buttons for the selecting the channel. Here's a poor picture of the interior that shows the CRT with its mask crooked. Anyway, very interesting set, very rare. I'm glad we got it for the museum rather than going into somebody's private collection. And I think we got it for a pretty good price, though the market is pretty soft for pre-war sets right now. I still think it was a good price, and they're happy to see it go to a museum rather than to a private collector. There's some other things that they have that we may end up with. He emailed me that they have a bunch of new old stock CRTs and some other stuff that we may bring back and put in the auction. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Steve, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Keith. I live in Clifton Park, just outside of Schenectady.
Right.
As far as I know, my site is not closing. There was a threat about a year ago that that was going to happen, but a deal was reached, and maybe it's fallen through since then. But as far as I know, they're not closing. I wouldn't be surprised if they're clearing out a lot of their stuff. But they also have an Octagon in their collection.
Yeah, I heard that. I realized that from your email you sent. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
He hasn't mentioned anything about the Octagon. I will ask about that. What I have been told is that they are hoping to salvage enough from the sale of all of their equipment to keep a web presence alive. But he may not have only part of the story.
Yeah, the story as of a little over a year ago is they found some structural issues with the building. And
Okay.
although it didn't seem all that much, but I don't know the whole story, but some sort of a deal was reached to keep it open for another 5 years. But I do know that I was in there over Christmas, and they don't have a whole lot of the radios and TVs, antique stuff on display like they used to. So they're kind of moving more toward interactive displays for kids and stuff like that.
Okay.
So it would not surprise me at all that they're cleaning out some or maybe a lot of their vintage collection like this TV.
Right.
But not actually closing down the building. Unless something fell through that I don't know about.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for the information.
Steve,
Yeah.
from what I could see, it doesn't look like there's a radio section, just television.
Just television. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unusual. And I had heard that these sets weren't in regular production, that they were only made for some GE executives to have in their homes. Have you heard
I
of
think
that?
that's true. Now, I have looked at I've zoomed, this is a high resolution picture of the chassis here, and the tube sockets and so forth are riveted in. So at least it's not a prototype with bolts and nuts. But that is interesting. I hadn't even thought about that with a console set like this with no radio section.
Yeah, that would have made it harder to sell since there wasn't that much TV on.
Yeah, right.
What broadcast standard did this receive?
Well, I think at that time they were at 441 lines. So the same as that. I think this was made at the end, as I understand it, at the end of 1938. I don't know when the 39 set models came out, but same standards as the 39 models.
Is there any way to get this to work? Is there any way to get this to work?
Any set can be restored.
I mean, receive some kind of generated picture or sound?
Well, the only thing, it certainly could be restored. Many of our sets are restored. I'm not in a position to tackle it. If someone shows up that would like to try it, I think that would be a great thing to do.
How would you know if it worked?
Excuse me, how would you know?
How would you know?
Well, you'd hook it up to an RF signal and look at the picture.
You can generate that picture.
Oh yeah, these will work fine. These pre-war sets will work fine on 525 line
Oh, they
signals.
do. Oh,
Yeah, well, in fact, our sets at the museum, we don't have a converter to convert it to 441. We just run them in a 525. And the only problem is that on the 12-inch sets, the width is marginal. So you see, for instance, our Silvertone that we have operating, the picture doesn't quite scan the whole width of the tube.
But it still shows the whole picture
It still shows the whole picture, yeah.
in the right proportions.
Yes.
Yeah, I restored an HM 185 a number of years ago, and it actually had a remarkably good picture on it. The sound with slope detection was a little bit iffy if the signal wasn't very strong, but the picture was pretty good. It was dim because of the picture tube, but it was clear, and it did fill up fast.
Right. Yeah, we have a 185 that works, and our 225 used to work. It had been restored, and something died in it. But the same thing, they produce pictures that are quite good.
Does it look anything like a regular TV? You know, from post-war?
Oh yes, yeah. The picture looks very much like a a picture from the the late 40s set.
Thanks.
And this one, if it does have a voltage doubler in the high voltage, ought to produce a really nice picture.
Does it produce X-rays?
And I don't think there's enough of what the high voltage isn't high enough to worry about that.
No. Is that picture tube available?
Yes and no. We had a batch of radar tubes rebuilt to put in these sets. All the 12-inch pre-war sets use the same tube, a 12 AP4. And one of our sets, our RCA TRK12, has one of those tubes in it. We have a couple of spare 12 AP4s that are good, and they come up on the market occasionally.
Steve, are you able to get any kind of service data on it? Diagrams?
I haven't started trying to look. I was going to ask Daryl Hawk is probably the person that's most likely to know of such a thing exists. And I just haven't. This has come up so quickly. I haven't had a time to trace that down. But just looking at the tube layout, it looks awful similar to the TRK12.
Yeah.
A couple of minor differences. It looks like it may have looks like it has a 6L6 horizontal output. I'm just guessing here. That's the same. All the IF tubes are the same. They use 6F8s for oscillators, 6H6 for detector. I don't know what these are. Maybe a DC restorer. But even without service literature, it wouldn't be difficult to trace the schematic and figure out what was going on. Any other comments, questions?
Does that have the 6L6 for a horizontal output?
Yep.
It's the first time I think I've ever seen that. Done
Well,
that
the TRK12 and 9 have a metal 6L6 in them, and there's a note in the service literature that says they had to be the version that had two, if I remember this correctly, two metal rings at the bottom where the base is put on. So it had to be a special 6L6.
I was going to say, but dissipating, the current that it would do, unlike an audio output tube, it looks
Yeah.
like it'd have to be something a little heavier duty than that. Interesting.
Is that the 6L6G that's on the schematic?
It's a G in this set.
Yeah, yeah. So that's
Um,
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Does it have AM sound?
Yeah, oh yes.
And the other thing I wanted to ask if that museum in Schenectady might have some mechanical television artifacts, because that would be what would come out of the GE plant early on.
Yeah, Keith just mentioned that they have an octagon, which is the rarest of mechanical sets. So I'll follow up on that tomorrow.
And they might have some research stuff, or perhaps even
Right.
some studio scanners.
Good idea.
Yeah, they have some GE stuff, and I think they have an extra wheel for their octagon too, because they pulled that out for our party, our GE Christmas party over Christmas. And if the Schenectady Antique Radio Club used to hold their meetings in the basement there, and we're out in the parking lot now, so I'm not sure who's been in the basement in a long time, but I haven't. And there might be other goodies in there.
Yeah, just think if you could find the octagons that they used for the Queen's Messenger broadcast.
Yeah.
Right.
Does every single capacitor in that thing have to be replaced like a radio would at that age?
Yeah, it would. Well, every single paper capacitor and electrolytic would have to be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
Are the resistors probably good?
No, we have discovered more and more that a lot of the resistors have drifted significantly. So everything has to be checked.
Are they carbon from then?
Yeah.
What happened? Do they dry out, the resistors? How did they fail?
I don't know.
But they do.
They change value, yeah.
Hmm.
Tend to drift up in value.
All the back
about the 6L6, you didn't have a big deflection angle to worry about in those 12 AP4s. So that'd be one reason I think you could use that. And there just weren't many other tubes for television available for them to choose from.
That's correct. There's another example of that. The RCA sets use a 6J5 oscillator, and you can see this set does too. In the RCA sets, there's a special winding on the power transformer to run, I think, 6.8 volts to the 6J5 rather than 6.3. Because it had a hard time oscillating at the frequencies that were required. So that's another example of where the tubes just weren't available for television at the time.
You had to change I'm sorry.
As far as the resistors are concerned, they're all made out of carbon anyway. And I would think a 70, 80, 90-year-old resistor, the carbon would just deteriorate through moisture or whatever. So all the resistors should be checked.
Yep.
And that would answer to the question that they would go up in value rather than down. That carbon pack just kind of comes apart.
Right.
So they had to increase the emission of the cathode in the 6J5 to get it to oscillate?
That's right. They're just increasing the emission. Yeah.
Did that make it burn out faster?
Probably, but tubes burned out all the time in these things.
So all those vacuum tubes are still available?
Oh yes.
What the hell? How long would it take to get this to work?
Hours and hours.
Weeks?
Especially
need a fortune teller.
Months?
What's that?
You need a fortune teller. That's an interesting question.
Yeah, right. One of the things that in the restorations that I've done is that I want to make it look identical or as close to identical to the original as possible. So each capacitor, I reused the original shell, removed it, and put a modern capacitor inside it. They're smaller, so they would fit, and then sealed them back up. So it's very, very labor intensive to do it that. And I think that's the only way that I would recommend doing something like this.
Those capacitors be wax? Rolled wax or something?
Well, yeah.
Well,
Most
All
of them
the
are wax.
capac- Yeah,
There's a
all of
couple
them
high
are
voltage
wax.
ones.
huh?
Except for the high voltage ones, all the capacitors in there, there'd be wax caps that all
Yeah.
have to be looked at. A friend of mine here in Knoxville that he kind of redoes them to some degree has like an old coffee pot that he can melt wax in it, paraffin. And once you melt all of the wax off of those condensers and stuff in there, he can actually take the insides out. And actually, the label inside actually looks like it's brand new when you melt all of the old dirty wax off of it. And he'll insert a new capacitor inside of it, and he'll has a little process where he pours wax back in it, makes them look like they're brand new and everything. But every cap in that thing would have to be gone through your electrolytics. And if you want to keep it original, you can open up the cans and put in new electrolytics in it, to keep it original looking and all of that. But yeah, every resistor should be checked and everything, because if you don't check something, that's where you're going to have trouble there when you overlook something there. So, yeah, but as far as how long would it take to restore one, that's like asking how long would it take to restore a car? Well, you just have to.
Yeah, right.
I'd check it when it comes in, Steve, and see if it hasn't been monkeyed with. If it's literally 100% original, I think that one would very easily qualify as something to just leave it original and not even
Right.
go and restore it.
I think that's probably true.
Even if you get it working perfectly, I mean, it's a primitive circuit, so to speak, in how they're assembled. But how long would it last? And, keeping it all original and stuff it's like many people that come into my collection, they say, do all of these radios work or all these TV sets? I say, well, yes and no. Because if you restore each and every one of them, you've got a lot of time involved, and you might set one up in 5 years, you turn it back on and it won't work. So you've wasted your time. If you keep your key sets working and something like that, you just find another set to look at. But I'm sure everybody would have a pretty good idea of what the picture would look like on it if it were working. And you probably do more harm than good trying to go through it than just keeping it and leaving it original, in my opinion.
The people coming through my collection, I give them the answer, they can all be made to work.
Yes.
Yes. If it has to work, that's one thing. But just to make everything working is a waste of time. Just like looking at old radios. What's there to listen to in a radio? They all sound very similar. And, what would be the point? If you want to listen to one, here's one over here in the corner that works. But, leave the nice ones, original ones alone.
Yeah. Well, we've taken the position that because the pre-war sets are so different, nobody's ever seen them operate. We try to have a few of them working. We've been successful in doing that, but just recently we've gone to making videos of the screens and then running having a modern TV set on the flat screen on the wall with a loop showing the various sets working so that we save them. Now, like for the convention, we will be turning on our sets that work, but that's the only time.
Some of those older sets are just too valuable to let them run all day long and stuff.
Yeah.
They're not helping the set. It's
Right.
just, it's like trying to make a taxi cab out of a old Model A Ford. What would be the point? And,
It's kind of like a candle, I mean, it's going to burn out eventually. So, but the main thing is to think of it's only going to be original once. As soon as you start messing with it, it's not original anymore. And maybe just leaving it the way it is kind of a message for future generations to see what actually happened.
That's a good
Yep.
point.
Yeah, especially if it's intact.
Yeah, see, right.
I mean, if the thing is a piece of junk or something, all ratted out and stuff, that's different. It's kind of like the people who make cat beds out of perfectly good TVs. But
Right.
I'm for keeping it just the way it is because eventually, in 100 years, there's not going to be any of these around or very few. And if this one's saved and you can see what the technology was like in 1938 or whenever this was built, I think that's pretty significant.
Good point.
Why did it have RF amplifiers? Was that because there were so few stations, or you could be further away if you were an executive? What it does in the other TVs of that era don't. What advantage did the RF amplifier provide to this?
Well, it makes it the range that you could receive usable pictures is larger if you have an RF amplifier as a lower noise figure. I think probably the RCA and the other manufacturers thought that all the viewers were going to be right within 10 miles or so of the transmitter, and that it really wasn't needed. That's the only thing I can think of. Maybe somebody else has a reason why they didn't do it.
Well, the transmitters of the time weren't very powerful. I mean, they're talking about, looking at some of these old magazines, they're talking about 1,000-watt TV transmitter. That's nothing compared to, the 500,000 watts or something that somebody's running.
Right.
That's a snowy picture. So
Dumont started with a 50-watt transmitter. And
exactly.
the other thing is that they were selling or installing them around Schenectady, and the stations they wanted to get were out of New York City. That's a haul to so RF amplifier would be a good idea.
What kind of antenna would this have been used with in 1939 or whatever? I mean, on the roof? What it wouldn't be a rabbit ear.
No, I think they put in outdoor antennas. I think probably the installations back before the war were done by by RCA and GE and Westinghouse, so a professional came and set you up. Back to your comment about Schenectady, the GE had a station in Schenectady, and they had a site near Schenectady where they picked up the New York channels and relayed them into Schenectady, so people could get programming from New York City.
Can I ask, what is the chance that a transformer would go bad because of the insulation in it? Does anyone know if that has happened? Has anyone seen that happen, where an old transformer?
Oh, yes.
All the time.
All the time, and there are companies
Yes.
that will rewind them. In the sets we've restored, we've had a couple of dozen transformers rewound. The main one that goes bad, from my experience, is in those sets they didn't have flyback transformers like the post-war sets did. They had brute force high voltage. They had a big transformer that created 6,000 volts AC and a rectifier tube, and those transformers went bad frequently. But there were companies, there probably still are companies that could rewind them.
Was it the shellac on the wire, or do you know what the failure?
A lot of
anyone know?
internal
Really,
shorts.
It's the way they were wound, the manufacturing techniques that they used. They didn't expect these sets to last 50 or 100 years. So they used modern day, at that time, techniques and winding coils. Now, here in Knoxville, Magnavox was here, and Joe Zonin here, he had a coil winding. He's an expert on winding coils and stuff. And that they'd use certain types of wax paper. They had other type papers that would have a harmful effect of the insulation on the copper wire, the way it was wrapped. It depends on how the winding itself was wrapped, and also how much current would that transformer deliver, and its temperature ratings, and how would you use it. and especially when they start getting old or getting old, that somebody will plug the set in without checking any caps, and it draws when a transformer starts smoking, it's done for. I mean, a little poof of smoke out of it, that's it. But some of them, they had a cumulative effect on it, that one winding, the shellac on the copper wire itself, it might short out to the next winding. Well, it wouldn't make any difference at that point, but there'd be a temperature difference right there. It'd raise in temperature in that particular winding, and then you'd have what do they call it, the effect, an effect on it, that it would take the next winding, then the next
Right, it
winding.
would be cascading.
Cascading, it would take a cascading. But to ask how long would a transformer would last is like, how long will a car engine last or anything? You'd need a fortune teller. It depends on temperature, how it's used, how much it's used. Is it in a bad, it's stored in a basement where it's damp? Dampness can get in those things, and especially when your wire starts corroding. There's 10,000 different reasons why a transformer would fail. But yes, they had failures on all of that. But regarding the antennas and putting outdoor antennas, back in the late 60s, I used to work at Music Land in a Bearden Shopping Center. It's next door to my high school, and I used to work for them. When we'd sell a new Zenith television set, we had a guy that would put up an outdoor antenna for $75. And that was a lot of money back in 1968, 69, because we didn't have cable here back then. So they'd put up a Yagi type antenna or something like that. But you'd have a pipe up there, and they'd have straps that go around your chimney. You'd run in the wire, to your TV set and all of that. That was a common thing to go in a neighborhood, and you'd see outdoor antennas mounted to the chimneys and stuff. But yeah, there were people that went out and would install them. RCA was no different. All television salespeople, they all had somebody that would put up an outdoor antenna. It was no big deal back then, but you had to have it. Or you just used a pair of rabbit ears, and you'd have to get up there and adjust the rabbit ears. I remember we had a grocer here in Knoxville named Cass Walker, and he had the Cass Walker Star Time, but he had this guy that would speak with an accent. And they'd get up and be selling something, and Cass Walker would get up there and open his jacket, and he'd reach in his pocket and pull it. Well, we got a sale on soup today, 2 cans for so-and-so. Well, this one guy got up there, and they were selling those, if you remember those Rembrandt antennas, they had a selector switch on them that had just switched the connections on the antenna. But this guy would tout it as and it has these rabbit ears have a picture clarifier on it, like it had a clarifier on it. But those rabbit ears were a common thing back then. If that didn't work, then if you lived, behind a mountain or something, then you'd have to have an outdoor antenna in order. But we had only 3 channels back then. Actually 4 if you counted channel 2 that came from Sneedville. But that's how that worked back then.
Oh, in the late 30s, those antennas generally, I think, were directional. With the TVs, were all the stations sort of in a conical spatial sense?
That's why you'd use a Yagi antenna, or you had a rotor on your thing. If you had that little desktop-like thing that would turn your antenna around on a rotor, yeah, they were directional. They were somewhat.
In the late 30s? I mean, I'm talking, when that TV was around.
Oh, in 1930s, the antennas were dipoles. That was it. They didn't.
Yeah, it was. Yes, dipoles back then. Yes.
Yagis hadn't been invented.
But
That's correct.
how did they mount them? Were they directional?
Oh yeah, a little bit.
So that's what I was getting at. Were the transmitters sort of congregated together so the antenna would point in the right direction for a moment?
In 1938, there weren't transmitters. There was transmitter 1.
Oh, okay.
That's why
RCA was at the Empire State Building. If GE had a station, a TV transmitter, it was the only one in town.
Oh.
The only exception to that would be New York area, because there were CBS had a transmitter too, but it was on the Chrysler Building, which is pretty close to the Empire State
Yeah.
Building. And the Dumont, I think, was broadcasting from New Jersey. So I don't know what they did. Probably put up separate antennas for different channels, but there weren't that many channels.
Dumont, when they went to their bigger transmitter, it was in New York too. But
Okay.
when where we were a little south of us in New Jersey, you could get some New York and get some Philadelphia. So I'd seen some people put two antennas up, and you just change the wires on the TV depending on which one you wanted.
Okay.
I've seen many antennas on top of roofs that have 3 or 4 up there, and they were all aimed in the right direction, the direction of the tower. And another common thing that some of these antenna people would do, they had a little, in fact, I've got a set. What's that little Sentinel TV that looks like a pyramid or a trapezoid? You know which one I'm talking about. I've got one of those, and it's got someone cut holes in it and put meters in it and put extra pots in it. It's when they went out and set up an antenna on the roof, they'd bring a TV up there and plug it in, and it'd run the directional, get the best reception. Little TV set. Come to think of it, I have to show that up there sometime. But anyway, they used it for a direction finder. But I've seen, we only had like 3 major channels here, channel 6, 10, and 26, and channel 2. And a channel 2 antenna was huge. This thing would be like 20 feet in length. And you'd see an extra support up there with this huge channel 2 antenna. And then you'd see up there your channel 10 or 26, and it'd be a little one that'd, be aimed in a direction. Yeah, they worked pretty good later. The more money you spent, the better off you were. But for all practical purposes, people would put that up. And if they didn't want to put all that stuff up there, they'd put a rotor on it, which worked pretty good.
Yeah, post-war, when there were multiple transmitters in the city, the local TV sales stores would and technicians would develop a more or less standard antenna arrangement, and they would get named for the city. Indianapolis sold Indianapolis antenna rigs, and it was the case that most of the stations were to the north, but there was one that was out to the west. So they had a standard setup that would have a broadband antenna pointed north and a Yagi pointed west to that one outlier.
Most old cities had an electronic supply house. Like we had Smith Electronics, here in Knoxville and a few others, and they were kind of experts. Somebody'd say, I need a channel 10 antenna or something. And they'd stock these particular antennas and stuff. So, like
Hey, Dave, I'd like to share, I got some pictures of pre-war antennas. Let me see if I can pull it up. There you go.
Pole by pole. Oh.
Yep, that's about right.
And you can see there were dipoles, but there were also a little bit fancier antennas.
Yeah.
It had reflectors on them.
Well, Steve, the most common antenna back in that time was a double bay conical.
Back in the post-war, in the late 40s, that was true. Yes.
Yeah, the late 40s.
Yes.
We put ours up on a pipe, and so we could rotate and this is before we had rotors. And we put a big pipe up, and at least my father and I did, and we lived near Indianapolis, east of Indianapolis, and we could get Cincinnati on a good day with, if the wind was from the southeast, we could get Cincinnati, and that's where the baseball game was. you know. So and then when the stations in Indianapolis come on the air, they were in different locations. So we would have to turn that pipe to get the picture, because there was no antenna rotors then. So we'd rotate the pipe.
It's called an Armstrong rotator.
Well, they're still doing that in the 60s and even 70s, at least in Texas. It was pretty common. Keep a Stilson wrench attached to the bottom of the pipe, so you had a little bit of leverage. And the youngest kid gets out is turn it a little farther. Oh, that's good. No, too far.
Yeah. Well, that's Texas, though.
Well, we had stations all over the place. I mean, where I am in East Texas, you could get Dallas on a really good day, and people use telephone poles with an antenna on top of them sometimes. But I know my aunt and uncle had a 50-foot tower in the back of their yard and a rotor. They were styling here, and they had we get Shreveport, which is about 60 miles away, and you get Dallas, which is about 100 miles away. But it depended on the atmospheric gods and how things were working. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. And I know they had a local TV station in Tyler, Texas, which is about 100 miles from Dallas and about 70 or 80 miles from Shreveport, and they used to be both ABC and NBC, and they had two antennas on top of their building and a Conrack tuner, and they would rebroadcast either WBAP NBC from Fort Worth, or they go at a station break and they would go change the channel on this tuner and go to the ABC station in Shreveport, and that was what went on the air. So it was kind of crude.
And especially if you lived on top of a mountaintop or a higher elevation there, and you put up an antenna array up there, you better have a darn good lightning arrestor on that, because I've seen many. I remember here in Knoxville, they had a complex area called Shagbart. Boy, lightning went up there, and when it would hit an antenna or something like that, it would practically liquefy all of the copper wire in it. That heavy antenna not coax cable, but it's got that foam in the middle. Man, there'd be no wire in it. All the edges of it would be frittered out, and there wouldn't be a speck of copper in it whatsoever. And boy, if you get in your house or anything like that, I'd seen a lot of lightning damage. And I had one where we had to replace the outlet, but we had to cut the power cord because the power plug was stuck in the outlet. It was welded to it. But yeah, you had to be careful with stuff like lightning back then as well.
You still do. As somebody I think somebody in Canada said, she blew up real good, didn't she?
When I was growing up, we had two channels, and this was in North Louisiana. So since I was the TV expert in the house, we had two antennas, one pointed in the direction of one and one in the other, two down leads. Changing the channel, and that changing the channel on the TV set, and then changing the to a different antenna on the back, and that was the way we handled the directional problem.
A lot of people used a double pole knife switch. The Radio Shack and a few other places sold these things, and you connected one antenna to one side, the other antenna to the other side, in the middle to the TV, and that way you go flip the switch, and that was much easier than changing the wires.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We weren't that sophisticated.
I grew up in New England, about halfway between Boston and Providence, Rhode Island. You get both TV markets there. It was the same thing on both channels, both Boston and Providence, but sometimes they'd have a ball game or something you want to watch that was on one cities and not the others. So that was a big deal. But if you got your antenna just right, you could get both from the back side and the front side. So that was pretty handy. But in the later days, especially the 50s and 60s, the TV stations finally figured out if they put all their transmitters in the same general area, for instance, in Boston, they were all in Needham, eventually off of what was called Route 128. They wanted people to watch TV, let's face it, so if pointing your antenna one direction got all the channels from Boston, then that was a good thing. So that they kind of decided that was a good idea, and that simplified things a lot.
I think the first places to get the best antenna setups were bars, especially when there would be a blackout of some sports on the local station. Like in Chicago, all the bars needed antennas set up that would pick up Rockford.
Yep, you're absolutely right, Wayne. Back when I lived in Dallas, back in the 60s, the Dallas Cowboys could not sell out a game with $2 end zone tickets and $6 40-yard line tickets. So they'd black out the game in Dallas. So it was a huge market for cowboy TV antennas. And I mean, they tried all kinds of bizarre antenna configurations. You could pick up Waco, which is about 60 miles south of Dallas. You could pick up Sherman Dedison, which is about 60, 70 miles north of Dallas. And you could pick up Tyler, which was maybe 80 miles away. So everybody did that. And I mean, it was a really, really big deal selling these antennas. And every bar had them. They might have three, one for each of the stations, so they could watch the Cowboy games.
What was the basis?
I lived in South Texas in the 1950s, and south of San Antonio, about 125 miles, and about 125 miles north of the valley, Rio Grande Valley, and we had NBC and CBS in San Antonio, and I had a TV Yagi on a tall tower with a rotor on it, and unfortunately, we would get channel 4 and 5. And 4 and 5 were NBC, CBS in San Antonio, but they were CBS and NBC in the Valley. And so we would end up with the picture from NBC and the sound from CBS coming from the other directions. But it was an interesting time.
It would be very different, I would think, getting two different things at the same time.
What was the basis for the TV cameras then? Was it iconoscope, or what did it use to?
Well, Image Orthicon, and then eventually when color came out, those were Image Orthicon cameras at first, and eventually Plumicon cameras, then Ceticons and all kinds of other weird
In
varieties.
1938?
Oh no, not in 1938.
That's what I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
With these TVs, sort of on the other end of the issue.
They'd be an iconoscope for sure.
In the 30s?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's when they came out. The Image Orthicon came out around World War II or somewhere in that vicinity.
1948, I think, is when they really hit the market hard.
Yeah, I think they were. I mean, even the military cameras back during World War II used an iconoscope tube. It was a little smaller version, but they put them in drone aircrafts a lot. We've got one somewhere.
Yeah, I've got a half a dozen of those cameras. There it is, that small iconoscope too, and they actually work pretty good.
Yeah, they like a lot of light. I got one when I was in high school. There's a surplus store that sold me one for practically nothing. And if I took my dad's 500-watt slide projector, took the lens off the thing, and just focused the picture from the slide projector onto the target of the thing, it made a pretty good picture, actually. Not bad.
That was a planar target, right? In the iconoscope. Am I thinking of that right?
It's a mica plate inside the tube.
Yeah, and then it's got stuff on it.
Yeah,
cesium and silver.
Okay.
Cesium was the active thing, and the silver was the sort of the other side of the plate.
Yeah. Okay.
I always thought of it working almost like a flying spot scanner in a way, just scan that disc.
In the iconoscope, the active side was silver with cesium. The back plate for the signal could have been anything else. It probably was not silver, but maybe some alloy of tin.
Hey, Julian, do you have an extra lens for one of those cameras? Because I've got the camera, but I'm missing the lens.
I don't have any extra lenses. I got a bunch of the cameras, and I think I'm missing. I don't know. I don't think I'm missing one, but it was kind of interesting how I remember back in the early 60s when we lived in Seattle, Washington. That's when I met Norman Ahlquist up there. In fact, there was a guy that did an article on him, and I have the camera that Norman Ahlquist made when he was 14 years old using an Image Orthicon. but he first experimented with one of those military iconoscope cameras, and it actually worked pretty good. But he didn't like the lens that was on the front of those cameras as they came. In fact, the original lens that was on it, it had like a little, you know, like in your rear window in your car, they had that little wire in it, you know, for defogging. Well, anyway, it had one of those things, and he didn't like that. But he used a lens and a little, you know, like a little cardboard drum, and he had a, you know, the old Kodak cameras with a, you could unscrew the lens thing out of it. Had those early Kodak cameras that were fold out. What's that? No, he had a Kodak lens and front that he made on it, and it actually made a pretty good picture from that standpoint, although it did use a lot of light. But you could use just about any lens you wanted on those things. You could make your own drum on it. I'll look and see what I've got. I've got a bunch of those cameras. In fact, I've got one that they came out after that iconoscope. They made one with an image orthicon. I'd never seen one of those before that they used in that, but that was apparently very short-lived.
I'm missing a lens too, and I have a feeling it's because the surplus dealers got more for the lens than they would for the camera.
Yeah, I probably you're right.
True.
I understand that copier, the old style Xerox copier lenses work pretty well for that. They're about the right physical size and focus.
Well, I think you'd use almost anything, but it's the physical mounting. It'd be really nice to have something that looked right. Because it'd be nice to put it on display, if nothing else. I know
Yeah.
ETF's got one on display. I think it's working too, doesn't it?
Yes.
You can make your own. It's sort of like not a cardboard drum, but you could make as long as it fits that hole in there, you could make one, you know, out of sheet metal and stuff like that. But you could use about any lens you want on that thing, and be no problem really. But
I was
see.
just trying to avoid the make one because we got about 1 million projects that all we got to do is make one, you know, and then it'll be just fine, you know. So
yeah,
it's always something, you know.
Can I ask? I put something in chat. There is a YouTube video that talks about a TV polo meter where they would drive a truck around the neighborhood and try to determine what channel you were watching at a particular time.
You're talking about England or something like that, where they're trying to find people that didn't pay for a license for their TV set.
Well, they did that in England, but they did it for rating purposes in the U.S. at some
Yes,
point.
they did it in the U.S.
Yeah, because they could tell, and there's somebody did it for radio too, because they could get into the IF frequency of your TV and figure out what you were watching, and give you a rating point or not for, you know, the Jackie Gleason show was really popular tonight, whatever.
How do they do
You
that?
have to have a superhet radio though to oscillate a signal out.
No, I don't think that was a problem actually.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
as Julian points out, in England, if you had licensed TV, you had to license your TV, and they would drive around through neighborhoods to see who had a TV that was on, picking up one of the only BBC channels, the only channel, and so that simplified things. And if you hadn't paid your license fee, we can now issue you a ticket and make you pay it. What a
How did
concept!
they pick up the intermediate frequency? I mean, was the oscillator that powerful, or was it coming from the
Oh
antenna?
yeah, it
What's going
read the
on?
horizontal oscillator in your TV set, but when they came out with LCD TVs, that kind of hurt that thing.
Well, it wasn't the horizontal oscillator they were looking at. It was the local oscillator and the tuner.
Yeah, right.
And those things radiated like crazy into your antenna.
Oh, they did.
So
Yeah,
that's how they picked them up, and they could tell what frequency it was, what channel you were watching by the frequency of the oscillator.
Right.
Yeah.
I worked at a TV shop back in the 60s, and if you were working on an AM radio and wanted to see if it really worked, you had to go turn off all the TVs on the bench because they just obliterated AM radio.
I think over in England, they didn't care what channel you were watching. They just wanted to know if you were watching a TV, period. that you had a license for your TV.
Right. Well, we had
No.
BBC or we had BBC too, so it wasn't really all that big a deal. I
Right,
remember when they
well,
got a third channel in England, and that was a really big deal.
that was in the
BBC One,
60s.
BBC Two. Yeah, that was the late '60s, and that was, you know, you had ITV or something, you know, or Thames Television. They kept rotating it, but it was you know, the TVs had 4 channel buttons on them, and that was expanding for the future, not for right now. We didn't have all 4 channels; they had 3.
Did TVs ever interfere with each other because of these
Oh, yes.
oscillate? They did.
Oh, yeah. There are combinations of stations.
Yeah.
You know, some markets had just the right combinations that if your neighbor had, you know, on channel 2 and you were trying to watch channel 7, or as an example,
Were they beat
yeah, you had a
frequencies?
problem.
Were they beat frequencies? What was going on?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you were really rich and had 2 TVs on the same antenna, you know, one in the bedroom, and they could interfere with each other
Very bad, yeah.
easily.
Otherwise, they had to be pretty close.
And they didn't use coax cable back then either. They used 300 ohm twin lead, which
Right.
was about as RF resistant as a piece of belt wire or your line cord on your telephone, you know, on your TV or something. It didn't exactly shield it from anything.
If you ever noticed in most of those older TV sets, there's a label on the back that says that it meets all FCC specifications for interference. You know, that the set would not give off so much RF interference or something. That was a big deal back then.
Yeah,
FCC actually used to check on that at one time. I don't think they do anymore because, I mean, there's enough stuff that pollutes the airways to where it's almost useless off the air now.
Yeah, the FCC went through various times when they, you know, really cracked down on that, and then they backed off or, you know, forgot about it or whatever.
Every now and then somebody will file a complaint with the FCC because they don't like some manufacturer or something and say this stuff really isn't FCC compliant even though it says it is. So that leads to all kinds of fines and lawsuits and stuff, and makes the FCC feel like they're doing something, but they really aren't.
I've got a story about twin lead. For a while, I lived in a duplex that was built in 1967. And one of the features that the builder included was a TV antenna in the attic with a socket in the living room. And this house was line of sight to downtown Chicago, and it was about 25 miles out, but it should have had a perfect picture. And I tried hooking up the TV to that outlet, and it was awful. So I opened it up to see what was inside, and the builder had, of course, at that time used twin lead, and to get it down to the outlet, they had just wrapped it spiral around the electrical conduit down the whole height of the wall.
I worked for a company when I was in college for a while that installed antenna systems in apartment buildings, and they'd go and run all the stuff twin lead inside the building before it was sheetrocked. And it was amazing how many times somebody managed to put a sheetrock nail right through the twin lead. It made it work really, really good. And it was my problem to go make a picture out of this thing. I did all kinds of weird things like stuff wire in the wall and connect it up. So they had the equivalent of a monopole antenna or something. It was interesting. At least when they got rid of twin lead, it improved TV a lot.
Hey, Chuck, I just looked in my radio room. I've got one of those old World War II iconoscope cameras that I've had since 1971. When I was in the Army, there was a surplus store right across the street. And apparently, when I went in the studio up there one day, and this guy had one of those cameras in there. And I said, well, I'm familiar with that. He said, oh, I bought that over there in that surplus store there for like $10. Well, anyway, the captain told him he didn't want that in the studio. He said, I have to get rid of it. So I bought it for $10. It's missing the outside case on it, but it has the original lens in it. It's got a good sized lens in that thing right there. I've had that thing all those years, and my favorite camera.
You know, the one I had when I was in high school, one of my friends was his uncle had a surplus store somewhere in northern Massachusetts, north of Boston anyway, and we went up there one weekend on Saturday, and because somebody had a driver's license, and we went up and bought all kinds of stuff. He was selling us stuff for $2, and I think I might have paid $5 for the camera with the lens, and I have no idea what happened to it. I know when I went to college, my dad made me get rid of most of the stuff that was in the basement of the house because he was afraid he'd have to move it because he was pretty sure I wasn't really coming back, at least not for any great length of time. So I probably went in a landfill in Walpole, Massachusetts, if you want to go digging for it. But I got it working. It had a dynamotor in the thing for the to get the high DC voltage. So I ripped all that out and built a power supply. It wasn't, old transformer out of a TV worked fine, and a 5U4, and we're off and running. So it was an interesting project, but I've got one now, but I don't have the lens, and it would be nice to have one on display at the museum. It'd be even better if it worked, but that's a whole other story.
What did people actually watch on TV in the 30s when this thing was working that they want to acquire there? What was there to watch?
It was a science fair project back then, more or less.
In what
and
sense?
it's very few people. It was like ham radio operators. They it was
NBC RCA had a regular program schedule every night, about 3 hours of broadcasts through 1939 and 40. Other stations had less extensive programs, but CBS had a regular program. So did the Boston station, the Schenectady station. Don Lee out on the West Coast and LA had several hours a night of programming. Some of it was on film. A lot of it was on film, and then some of it was live. They did, sort of the NBC in particular had the experience of their radio network, and they just sort of duplicated what they did on the radio network, try to do the same sort of thing on television. So there was a fair amount to watch.
I mean, game shows? What was the programming?
No game shows.
Wrestling was popular. Yeah, wrestling was a real popular thing for a while because it was easy to, it was a small amount of space, so they could light it well.
Right. You can look on, if you look on our website, go to the pre-war broadcasting tab, and there are a bunch of program schedules from different stations there. So you can get an idea of what they had.
Some of it sounds incredibly boring. But
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
It was more the fact that it works at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a picture, and it's coming from outer space somewhere or other. Who knows?
Don't tell my grandmother that wrestling is boring. That was her favorite program.
Hey,
did you see what that guy did to Gorgeous George?
Hey, Wayne, I had a babysitter when I was about 5 or 6 who had to watch the wrestling, as she called it. And boy, I mean, everything stopped. I had to be in bed so she could watch her wrestling match. It was just a really big deal. And I thought she was 180 years old. She probably was, 60 or something. But
anybody notice in my microphone collection, here's an original pair of mic flags for the Don Lee. And there's another one there. Original stuff there. Had these a long time.
Those are very cool.
All original.
You got one of the best mic collections I know of anywhere. I mean, you've got stuff that us mere mortals have never even seen before. So
you need to come up here sometime and look at it.
Well, I've been there before, and you showed me we could barely get in the room with the microphones because there's so many of them in there. But yeah, I need to come back and see you. So maybe one of these days we'll get that done.
Crowded. Oh, you're just guessing.
It was crowded. I remember that.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
But there was stuff in that display case that I'd never seen before. Yeah, and I was in the sound business for a long time. So you win the microphone collection award for the year.
With those
I
weak,
remember. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, with those weak transmitters in the late 30s, did they have problems with ghosting at all?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah, especially with those non-directive antennas.
Yeah, you got a dipole antenna that picks up everything, so it picks every reflection off of any
Okay.
hill, any building, anything that's in the way. So you get a multipath. You get two different or three different versions of the same signal, and you get ghosting big time. And that was just something you lived with. Look, it's moving.
We have a lot of mountains around here in Tennessee, especially East Tennessee, and ghosting was a big problem here. It just bounces off everything up here, and buildings as well, besides mountains.
Oh, buildings will really do it. Dallas, it used to be all the TV stations were in downtown Dallas and actually transmitted from there. And as the skyscrapers went up, all of a sudden it became completely useless. They had to go move to a place called Cedar Hill, which is between Dallas and Fort Worth, south of the town, and put everything there. But even so, if you were in the wrong part of town and you needed to shoot a signal, pick up a signal off of Cedar Hill, and the buildings were in your way, you're going to get ghosts. There was just no way around it. It's just the way it was, because all these big buildings, they built a whole bunch of 50, 60-story buildings, and they just really, really did a number on over-the-air TV. So I guess cable was the only solution for a long time.
Must be awful in New York City too.
Oh, I'm sure it is. It's got to be horrendous in an apartment somewhere in Manhattan. Good
Sure.
luck.
Even though the antenna is way up there.
Yeah, but you're way down here in the canyon,
Yeah.
in the middle of things that reflect big time.
Yeah, it's interesting what things can cause ghosting. When doing a digital television field test, we ran into a strange problem in San Francisco where the mobile receiving van would be going up and down streets and avenues. And at some intersections, as they went through the intersection, suddenly the reception would go to hell. And then when they got out of the intersection, it would be okay again.
Well, that still happens
Well-
with FM radio too. I mean, you'll be listening to a station, you pull up to an intersection somewhere, and all of a sudden it frizzes out, and then if you get through the intersection, it's okay again.
Okay, but the interesting thing in San Francisco was when you plotted out those intersections, and we had test receivers that could measure the ghost delay, so you could do ellipses of constant delay to figure out what was reflecting. Those were intersections that had line of sight to the Golden Gate Bridge. And sure enough, the bridge towers were reflecting the signal from Sutro Hill and back into the city, and on those streets that were in between the bridge and the transmitter tower, as you cross that intersection, you suddenly got this huge signal from the bridge.
Yeah, you actually are getting your signal off of the bridge rather than off of Sutro Tower, I imagine. Sometimes when you put up an outside antenna pointing at something that was not where the transmitter was, actually worked better than where the transmitter was, because you're getting a reflected signal off of some strange building or structure of some kind.
I'm going to have to drop off. Haven't eaten yet, and I'm getting pretty hungry.
At that
So
time,
you
really,
guys, yeah, you guys keep up the discussion. I wish I could stay and listen to more of it. And we'll see you all next week, or next month, I should say.
Thanks. That was really interesting.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really cool TV. I mean, I'm really glad ETF's got it. I think where else will you find one?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's true about the museum. So many things that are unique, very, very rarely seen anyplace else.
Being in the museum business, we've got a lot of stuff that ETF doesn't have, but ETF's got stuff that we'll never have, and it's the only place you're ever going to see this. So it's certainly worth supporting just because people need to know. I mean, kids have no idea. We just had like 20 or 30 kids this morning that were, 6, 7, 8 years old and full of energy and stuff, and they have no idea about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And showing it to them is actually pretty rewarding. Because they're like little sponges. They really actually are interested. But we need to have places like ETF and stuff that actually preserve this for the future, because otherwise they'll never know. They think everything comes out of their phone.
I remember up at the Early Television Foundation one time, I made a mention. I was at a ham fest, and this elderly gentleman showed up pulling a trailer, and he had a whole bunch of junk in the trailer. But anyway, these two 15-year-old kids were looking through his trailer, and one of them found an old military field phone, an old FF8, if you know what that is. And anyway, one of them said, "Oh, that's a military radio. Those are valuable." I said, "No, no, no. That's not a radio. It's an old field phone." And they looked at each other in amazement. They looked and they said, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, you have a pair of them out there, and you have another guy that have a spool of wire, and you'd connect them with a pair of wires." They looked at each other in amazement and looked at me and said, "Wires? Are you sure?" Anyway, I always use that, I said, "No, if you remember the Flintstones at the beginning, you remember when Fred Flintstone pulls into that drive-in restaurant, they give him a set of ribs there, and the whole car turns over sideways." I said, "That's how big our cell phones were back then." Well, there was a guy up there at the Early Television thing. He was giving a talk, and he had one of the RCA sets that were shipped to Russia. Apparently, RCA sold 6 or 7 of them to Russia back there in the 30s or something. And anyway, he was up there in the stage trying to hook it up. And he says, "I got to hook these wires up there." And somebody out there in the audience yelled, "Wires? Are you sure?" Everybody just laughed, but these kids today, they haven't got a clue or anything like that. They're just, and, it's amazing that what they think, that they just can't imagine, what a wire would be.
Well, they have no idea. You guys don't know it, but or maybe you do. I own a couple of radio stations, and one day, one of the reasons I started a museum was about 10, 15 years ago. So kids came out to see the radio station, and when you come in the front door, and that's where I am right now, there's a bunch of old radios and a crank up Victrola in the room. It's kind of a display that you see when you first come in. And these little kids, they were Cub Scouts of some kind. There's this little red-haired kid who was the runt of the litter. And I thought I would show him the phonograph before we showed him the Dell computer that runs the radio station. Because, I thought it was more interesting. And I cranked the thing up, and the kid goes, "Why are you cranking that?" I go, "Well, this was made in 1905, and they didn't have electricity in 1905, or at least most people didn't." The kid goes, "No, everybody's got electricity." And I went, No, people really didn't have electricity. Some people did, but you were pretty well off or in a big city or something to have electricity. He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, indoor plumbing was a big deal. Very few people had it. You would have been the little kid in the family would probably have to have the last of the bathwater every Saturday night in the kitchen." And he looks at me like I just landed from Mars or something. Really, he said, "Really? With things like that?" I said, "Yeah, well, very few people had electricity. Hardly anybody had a car. You had to be really rich in 1905 to have a car. And to have, nobody had telephones or anything. Very few people had them." He goes, "Now, wait a minute. You're putting me on. That's not right. If they didn't have phones, how did they get on the internet?" He was serious. And that's when I went, these kids got to know this stuff. They really do.
Even in the 1960s and all of that, I don't know of any mothers that did not know how to fine tune a TV set. Every mother that I knew how to adjust the rabbit ears and fine tune the TV and adjust the color on a set.
Well, the kids did too. I mean, that was my job, was to go up and adjust the horizontal and vertical when they go from local sync to network sync, and the TV would start rolling and stuff. That happened all the time. And if you need the channel changed, uh, hey, put it on channel 4,
Yeah, I was my
Children in the
dad's
family
TV
were the
remote.
first remote,
Were indeed.
you know?
I was my dad's TV remote.
Yeah,
Every
exactly.
I
time he'd
was
get it,
too.
it goes.
Yep.
It's time for Perry Como. Go change it to channel 4.
I was real happy when we finally got the Channel Master rotor so that I wouldn't have to be the one to go and actually turn the antenna.
That was especially bad if it was raining,
Yeah, yeah.
snowing.
I have a friend that I guess did a pretty funny but pretty terrible thing. I don't think his daughter is ever really going to forgive him for it. But when his daughter was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old, they were watching a black and white movie on television. And make a long story short, he had his daughter convinced that the entire world, everything in the world, used to be black and white. But and then color TV came along, and then the whole world turned into color. But
I've had kids ask that before. Was everything in black and white before color TV was invented?
Yeah.
TV set.
I was thinking when you mentioned talking about the FCC, and I was thinking about Norman Alquist up in Seattle. We lived up on Queen Anne Hill up there in Seattle, and Queen Anne Hill's a mountain, except there's a whole city on it. Well, I had to walk to school, and I could walk by all 3 network transmitters, and I knew all the broadcast engineers there. And but anyway, one was Queen Anne High School up there. And when I'd walk home, I had to walk right by it. And I'd go in Queen Anne. Now, I'm like 11 years old then, and I wasn't in high school then. But I always liked to walk in the building and go up to the top floor where the science department was. And finally, Mr. Short one day told me, he says, no, don't come back anymore until you're in high school. And that just broke my heart. But I remember I walked in there one day, and Norman Alquist had put together an AM transmitter up there with a pair of 807 tubes there. And they were up there actually broadcasting up there in the up in the top floor in the Queen Anne High School. And they weren't playing music. They were had some LP record on philosophy or something. In fact, I remember asking one of the guys, I said, what are they playing back there? And he says, philosophy or something. Well, I didn't understand that back then. But anyway, they were up there transmitting with that thing. And all of a sudden, while I was up there, 2 men in dark suits. Now, Seattle had an FCC office up there. Anyway, 2 men in dark suits came in, and they looked at me and says, are you operating a radio station? No, not me. But they might be. And I disappeared because I thought they were going to take somebody to jail. I don't know how long that lasted, but they were in there. I don't know if they took the equipment or not, but anyway, they sure put a stop to it. I'll never forget that moment. But, the things we went through back then. And Norman, when he was like 11 years old, he was fixing ship's radar down there in Puget Sound. He was incredible. And when he built his Image Orthicon camera, he took circuits that he liked from RCA and GE and any of the other manufacturers. He picked out circuits that he liked best. And anyway, many years later, I asked him, I said, you still have that camera? He says, yeah, it's down in the basement. I said, I'd like to have that. And but as luck would have it, I met a guy that his sister lived here in Knoxville in a roundabout way off Craigslist. Anyway, he was coming from Seattle to here. And I said, what kind of a vehicle are you driving? And I said, I tell you what, if you rent a small truck or something, I said, I'd pay your fuel. So he went up there, and actually it worked out. He went there, and Norman filled that van up with all kinds of stuff. And I did get that camera. And rather recently here, about 6 months ago, there was a guy on Facebook, and he had a picture of Norman Alquist because he won the science fair project. He made he was a national winner of it. And he got to go to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and New York City and show that camera. And I remember that. Anyway, he he was commenting on a camera, and I said, I can do one better than that. I have that camera. And so I took pictures of it, and I gave him Norman's phone number, and he could talk to him, and he got to, so that's quite an ordeal there. That here's a 14-year-old kid that when he turned 16, he built his own image orthicon camera. That was quite a feat. And I think Mr. McKenna there, he was the chief engineer at Channel 4 of Como up there. He gave him a deflection foil and, for an image orthicon. But I've got this homemade camera, and I just part of my life since I was like 10 or 11 years old. And not only that, I have one of Channel 4's, their first color camera, a TK41. And I didn't know Chuck Ferris had this camera. Chuck Ferris used to live out there in the West Coast in California. He found out there was a Lincoln Mercury dealership up in Seattle that had this camera that apparently when Como was disposing of it, somebody saved it out of the trash and put it in the showroom. Well, push came to shove one day, they get a new manager, get this junk out of here. And Norman learned about it through another friend that it was for sale. I never knew he had it. But anyway, I ended up with it. Como was wanting it, but they didn't want to pay shipping on it, which is kind of silly. But anyway, this other guy wanted it, but Chuck said, I'd rather you have it as anybody. And I love that camera because that was at the World's Fair in Seattle. I watched them build the World's Fair up there. And King and Como, and every day they had something going on about the World's Fair up there. And this was Como's camera that they had done at the World's Fair. So it has a beautiful logo on the side. It's like kind of puffed out plexiglass that's colored letters on it, Como color. And I highly treasure that because I remember when I was around that camera, I said, boy, I'd sure like to have one of those. But, what's an 11-year-old boy going to do? Back then, a $70,000 camera. And here I finally have it, and now I've got my live stream there. So that's just part of my life. I just love things like that.
Well, I went to that World's Fair and remember seeing both of those. I was completely fascinated by it. Then I knew Chuck Ferris had it, and I thought that was really pretty cool. I'm glad you got it. So,
well, it almost got out, but I just can't imagine why Como wouldn't pay what would the shipping be to a TV station? It's that's
wouldn't have been that much.
I mean, you'd think that's like 2 cents worth, and but anyway, I ended up with it, and it's part of my life because I was there when it was actually being used. And after the World's Fair was over with, they took the Hawaiian Pavilion. When they didn't tear it down, but they saved the roof of it. It was kind of like a waffle roof where it had steep pitches going all around the circular thing there. And they moved it to the base of the Space Needle up there. Well, anyway, there was an arcade in there. And I'd hang out at that arcade almost every day or in the summertime. And they let me have keys to it. They knew that I had some intelligence there. And, somebody got a dime stuck or a nickel stuck in a coin slot, I knew what to do, That's kind of what got me in the coin machine. But I've been in it all my life, and had experience and just kind of, one thing led to the other. But I was always in the right place at the right time. And, where I was in Arlington, when I go to the incinerator and find old radios at the dump and run down the telephone repairmen there and get parts off their truck. Then in Seattle, I have around the TV stations and, I was just truly blessed that kids today cannot hang out at a transmitter site, and they don't have to have an FCC licensed engineer there when they're on the air at all times. But, everything's changed and all that. So, most of us, we were truly blessed that we were actually in something like that kids today don't have a clue.
I wanted to show you the camera that I got recently.
I got one of those.
I have 3 of them now.
Okay, well, those are that was the first ENG camera, basically. And
yeah, I was one of the engineers.
TK7.
Okay. Do you have a groove in your shoulder from where? Because I mean, it didn't have a pad or anything, and it's
not
a fairly
original.
sharp.
What's that? A TK760?
I'm sure. Yeah, 76, I think.
26.
Yeah.
No,
And I mean, they're heavy.
Yeah, they're heavy.
I'm impressed that you can hold it up, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're really heavy, and they do. Most people who ran them are seeing chiropractors these days, you know. So.
Yeah, I have to be careful. But yeah, that I just got 2 of these and a whole box of spares and another box full of pickup tubes, and charts and a VCR of the period. So
You got to
yeah,
get it working.
lots of luck.
Lots of rock, as they say. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I think out of 3 of them, I might be able to do it. But
Yeah, you probably can. They're not that complicated.
oh
But,
no, and I know it well. When I got it out of the box the other day, it was a real emotional moment because I hadn't seen one this clean since I worked there.
I was just going to say that looks incredibly in good condition.
Yeah.
Because usually they're all beat to crap, frankly.
Exactly. This is
Yeah.
an engineering lab unit.
Okay, that explains it. Because I mean, most of the ones that actually got used out in the field, you know, they just throw it in the back of the car and
Yep.
drag it behind the car by the cable or something like
Yeah,
that.
they didn't care.
They didn't know. It's just
Yeah. They also knew that it, they could do that and it would still work.
that was the whole idea, you know.
That's why it's so heavy.
What amazes me is how they did TK-41s up in stadiums and stuff. How did
Yeah,
they
there's
ever
there's
get
no
them up there on
handles
the
on
roof
them.
and stuff?
And the
Yeah.
41s don't have handles. You know, I mean,
Mark,
if it had a handle, it was portable. But
I'll put a picture of I have 2 TK-76s, but I'll put a picture up of servicing one of them here.
Oh.
That was with the garden hose.
Hey, that looks really good.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that'll work it.
Yep. That's
That was two. I got 2 of them. They were in the basement of the David Sarnoff Museum, which tended to get flooded. And this one was in its Thermodyne carrying case, traveling case, and it was floating in the basement, and then it stayed in the basement for another couple of weeks or years. And eventually when they closed, they were kind of throwing all this stuff out. So I got one that was above water, which is, kind of nice. And this one, which was below the water line, which actually I got 2 that were below the water line. And I gave one to Matt Pateray, and he said he was going to restore it. And Matt's pretty amazing. But I know that he looked at it and he said, "Nah, I don't think I'm going to restore it."
Probably
They
not.
were
But,
pretty well sealed. And that was part of the first demonstration at the 76 NAB, is that the cameraman came out, with one of these things, and it was live while they were talking. And he walked over to an area and rain came down. They set up a rain shower, and the camera got wet and continued to function because it was designed that way.
well, amazingly, cleaning out a piece of electronic equipment with a garden hose sometimes works pretty well. I've done it.
Yeah.
I was in the sound business for years, and we'd get people who would bring mixing consoles and things in that had been in a nightclub for years, and they'd be covered with fog fluid juice, pina colada, and tobacco and nicotine. And I mean, you could barely put your fingers on these things without feeling like you just were.
Yeah.
It's horrible. And we'd go take them outside and go take a garden hose to them and power wash the things and let it dry for a couple or 3 days, and then clean all the pots and everything. And actually, the thing would usually work again. I mean, a lot of times you had nothing to lose.
Yes.
You were talking
I know our old Tektronix scopes in the lab, when they get refurbished and recalibrated eventually, but when they get refurbished, they would exactly wash them with soap and water and dry them out and replace any parts that were out of spec. But That was standard procedure.
Yeah, Liquid Dawn does a real good job on them, actually. You know, you can spray that on it because that'll get all the grease and weird stuff off of it. It actually works. But you got to dry it out before you plug it in.
They used to have Freon tanks, you know, that were detergent action. You'd take the whole unit and just drop it down in this tank of Freon and wash it off. And, you know, that never seemed to bother any of the components on it either.
Oh, but that's politically incorrect these days.
You were talking about the David Sarnoff Museum. When they closed it down, they sold a lot of their stuff. Through Dave Johnson, I think I've got one of their prototype iconoscope tubes. Real small, an experimental tube there, and still has the label on it that Zworyk can probably actually will play with that thing, all of that. Another one of my little treasures that I have there, an experimental iconoscope tube. I have two of them.
That must have come from being this from earlier when they were just discarding old useless things. Because I know that when they closed the museum, they did throw out a lot of stuff. They did sell a few things. I bought a CTC5 from the museum for a few $100 but it wasn't of any historic value. It was just a CTC5 that happened to find its way to the museum. But anything that was important was saved. Iconoscopes and experimental tubes were all saved and sent over to another collection. So that must have been much earlier when they just chucked stuff out. A friend of mine, Jim Whartonby, used to work there, and one day they were, again, clearing out. They had only even though it was a huge place, they had only a limited amount of space. And they were throwing out an ugly gray plywood box about the size of a couple of dorm refrigerators. And he offered to get it upstairs and out of the basement and throw it out into the trunk of his car, of course. And that was a trinoscope, which he said he never did. He never did divulge what he got paid for it, but I don't know if he sold it to Dave Johnson or somehow, but he said it did fund his radio collecting hobby for many years.
I've got that tube here. Let me go get it. I'll show it to you guys.
Well, folks, I'm going to have to go. It's way past my dinner time, and I am starving to death. We had a big crowd at the museum today, and I haven't eaten since sometime very early this morning. So I'm going to say goodbye, but everybody have a great time, and this has been a lot of fun. I hope I didn't talk too much, but I'm guilty of doing that sometimes.
Yeah, I think that it would be worthwhile to do a grand tour of TV museums. There's a lot of good museums out there that don't get much publicity. There used to be another one in South Central Ohio that was a television museum that I saw 30 years ago. I don't know what has happened to it. Oh, there's Julian. Oh.
Here's this tube. There's a prototype iconoscope tube. It has a label on it, October 31st of, I think, 1940. See if I put it up. See the top of it?
Interesting. So it must have been they were trying smaller mosaics.
I'm sure they did all kinds of them all up, but this is kind of one that's down to air apparently. But anyway, something like that. You can see the label on it there.
I never saw one look like that.
Yeah.
Small.
Yeah, I don't me see if I can read anything off this label here. See if it has a name or anything on it. I've never really paid that much attention to it. South, it says South Vault, V-A-U-L-T, and looks like J-E-D or J something D, and it says 1031 of like 1940. I think that's what it is, and then has a number on it, L something there, a reference number. And then the other one, the labeled unreadable, doesn't say blank, but it's got all kinds of little wires up around here, you know, for focus. Whoops.
Careful. Don't drop it.
Yeah, that's, but anyway, I thought you'd like to see that. Interesting how it looks like you can see when you look through the back part of it, you can just look straight through it. I don't know, there's probably not in imaging itself. They were experimenting with probably high voltage and focusing or whatever on there. But anyway, it's kind of neat. Yeah, it's kind of sad of it, Dave. I remember Dave Johnson invited me up in that, what was that, the Sears Tower he was in, or what building was that Dave was in Chicago? Anybody know?
Sears Tower, yeah.
The Sears Tower. It's on the 110th floor. And anyway, nobody can go to the 110th floor. You have to have, you know, special keys or whatever to get there. But you get up off the elevator there, and that entire floor in the Sears Tower, floor number 110 there were no walls or offices or anything up there. You could look around, you'd see the north windows, the south windows, and you could walk around up there. And I remember it was raining that day, and you go over there to any window that you want, and every window was covered with antennas over there. But I'm watching it rain going up. The wind was such in that tower there that when it would rain up instead of down. I'll never forget that. But I'm sure Dave he passed away. He had brain cancer there. And I guess they figure that, you know, being around all that RF up there had something to do with it, which is pretty sad. But he was a good guy.
I've had my show and tell. Enjoyed the conversation, so I'll say good night.
Good night. Kind of quiet. If no one minds, I'll pull the plug.
Yeah, I think it's time for me to sign out too. So
Okay.
good night.
Good night, Wayne.